Dear friends, English literature, romantic poetry, selected poems of Percy B. Shelley, Adonais, brief questions with answers. Brief questions 161 to 23. Question 161. How did Byron silence the Scotch reviewers? Answer. Byron silenced the critics forever, writing a satiric poem, English Birds and Scotch Reviewers. Question 162. Why does Shelley compare Byron to Apollo? Answer. Shelley metaphorically compares Byron to Apollo, the sun god who killed the monstrous serpent Python with an arrow. Just as Apollo silenced the Python with an arrow, Byron silenced the Scotch reviewers with a single satiric poem. Question 163. Who is Apollo? Answer. Apollo is the sun god. Question 164. Whom did Apollo kill? Answer. Apollo killed the monstrous serpent Python with an arrow. Question 165. When are insects born? Answer. Insects are born in the heat and light of the day. Question 166. When do insects die? Answer. They die when the sun sets. Question 167. Why does Shelley compare the critics to reptiles and insects? Answer. Reptiles and insects are fated to live a short life. Similarly, criticism of the critics does not last long. Critics are born when a great genius is at work, and they die and are forgotten with the passing away of the genius. Question 168. Which living poets mourn the death of Keats? Answer. Byron, Thomas More, Shelley, and Leigh Hunt mourn the death of Keats. Question 169. How do the living poets mourn the death of Keats? Answer. They mourn the death of Keats in the guise of shepherds wearing the customary garland of flowers and long cloaks. Question 170. How is Byron affected by the death of Keats? Answer. Because of the death of Keats, the characteristic passion and energy and vehemence of his poetry is suppressed by the dueling effect of grief on his mind. He mourns the death of Keats, singing a quiet, pathetic song which is appropriate to the occasion. Question 171. What is irony? And what is irony? Answer. It refers to Ireland. Question 172. Who is the sweetest lyricist? Answer. The sweetest lyricist is Thomas More, an Irish poet. His love for Keats makes poetry fall like music from his tongue. Question 173. Who is Thomas More? Answer. Thomas More is an Irish poet. Question 174. Why does Shelley imagine himself friendless? Answer. He imagines himself to be friendless as he is disliked and avoided by his countrymen. Question 175. What is nature's naked loveliness? Answer. It means the purest beauty of nature, the mysterious secret of nature, that is, those great principles and truths which reign the universe. Question 176. Who was Actaeon? Answer. Actaeon in Greek mythology was a Boeotian hero and hunter. Question 177. How did Actaeon die? Answer. He accidentally saw Diana's just goddess of the hunt naked body while she was bathing on Mount Citeron. It angered the goddess and she changed him into a stag, and he was killed by his own hounds, failing to recognize their master. Question 178. How is Shelley Actaeon like? Answer. Just as Actaeon fled in fear after being changed into a stag, Shelley ran away in confusion from vision after perceiving the naked loveliness, great truths of nature. Just as Actaeon was torn to pieces by his own hounds, Shelley was torn by his own thoughts. Just as Actaeon's hounds could not recognize him, Shelley's countrymen could not recognize his genius. Question 179. How was the spirit of Shelley? Answer. His spirit was graceful and timeless and swift like the leopard. Question 180. What was Shelley's spirit full of? Answer: his spirit was full of love. Question 81. 181. Why was love of his heart obscured? Answer: the love of his heart was obscured because of the loneliness of his life. Question 182. To what does Shelley compares the weariness of his soul? Answer: Shelley compares the weariness of his soul to a dying lamp, a falling shower, and a breaking willow. Question 183. Why doesn't Shelley perish? Answer: because of his love for the youth, Shelley does not perish. Question 184. How was the head of Shelley decorated? Answer: his head was decorated with pansy and violet flowers. Question 185. What do pansies symbolize? Answer: pansies symbolize thoughts or memory. Question 186. What do violets symbolize? Answer: violets symbolize past sweetness. Question 187. What does ivy symbolize? Answer: ivy symbolizes poetic inspiration. Question 188. How is Shelley different from other poets who mourn the death of kids? Answer: Shelley is different from other poets who mourn the death of kids because his sorrow for kids was the keenest of all. Question 189. Why do the other poets smile in tears? Answer: other poets smile in tears in spite of their grief because they are pleased to see that Shelley could not, as Shelley could give the sweetest and saddest expression to the feelings of sorrow. Question 190. What does Shelley do when Urania asks him who he is? Answer: instead of giving any answer, he shows her the mark on his forehead, which he compares to that of Cain or Jesus Christ. Question 181. How is the forehead of Shelley? Answer: his forehead is branded with a deep mark of condemnation like that of Cain and bloody like that of Christ. Question 192. How is the fate of Shelley similar to that of Cain? Answer: Cain was banished from society for killing his brother. Similarly, Shelley was expelled from Oxford University after publishing The Necessity of Atheism. Question 193. How is the fate of Shelley similar to that of Christ? Answer: his forehead bleeds like that of Christ when he suffered the agony of the thorny crown just before crucifixion. Christ sacrificed his life for the sake of humanity to make the world better, and like Christ, Shelley was a lover of humanity and tried his best to teach men a better world of society. Question 194. Why does Shelley regret in Adonais? Answer: he regrets that he has been misguided by society. Question 195. Who was Leigh Hunt? Answer: Leigh Hunt, 1784 to 1859, was an English critic, essayist, poet, and writer. He was good friends with both Keats and Shelley. Question 196. How does Shelley praise Leigh Hunt? Answer: he calls Hunt gentlest of the wise and praises him for loving, soothing, and honoring Keats. Question 197. How does Hunt mourn the death of Keats? Answer: his bosom is full of grief, but he does not utter any words of sorrow. Question 198. Our Adonais has drunk poison of. Identify the figure of speech. Answer: here metaphor is used. Criticism of Keats and Endymion is compared to poison. Question 199. Who is compared to a viper in Adonais? Answer: the critics of Keats and Endymion is compared to a viper. Question 200. Why does Shelley call the critic the nameless worm? Answer: Shelley calls the critic the nameless worm because he could not put his name on the criticism. Question 201. Why does Shelley condemn the critic to live a long life? Answer: Shelley condemns the critic to live a long life so that the critic can live on his disgraceful life. Question 22. Why does Shelley call the critic a noteless blot on a remembered name? Answer: Shelley calls the critic a noteless blot on a remembered name because the critic is infamous or anonymous, not noteless, whereas Keats is famous, remembered name. Question 23. What will be the critic's greatest torture? Answer: his guilty conscience will be his greatest torture. Thank you friends for watching my video.